Technology regulation. Apple CEO Tim Cook warning that more regulation in Silicon Valley is on the horizon.
Speaking, I am not a big fan of regulation. I'm a big believer in the free market. But we have to admit when the free market's not working. And it hasn't worked here. And I think it's inevitable that there will be some level of regulation.
This comes as Apple shares are in near bear market territory. Joining me now is disruptive tech research founder and chief analyst Lou Basenese. Lou, what do you make of Tim Cook's comments?
Look, he's being honest. Like, big tech blew it. They had an opportunity to self-regulate, and they didn't do it. And I think it's unfair for Apple, because if there's one technology company that's really looked after users' data and protected it, it's Apple. Now, you flipped over to Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. Their entire business models are predicated on exploiting user data. So, the guilt by association.
Lou, okay, so yes, it's a different business model. I think we have to understand that, first of all. And don't you think it's strategic also for Tim Cook to be able to go on the offensive at this point? He's more of a hardware maker, whereas others sell free services. They take your data. So I think it's easy for him to say, look, we're holier than thou, and we're probably better than Silicon Valley at this point.
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely strategic. There's no reason to get out in front of the public and figure out how to do this. If you remember when we were talking about trade wars and tariffs, Tim Cook got out there talking about that to try and influence the president perhaps too. And I think that's going to go on with all these big tech executives, because they are such a big part of our everyday lives. But at the same time, I do believe Apple can claim they are a little bit holier than the rest of the big tech sector and complex. They do look after our user data, whereas Facebook, they just had a patent grant application filed that looks to predict your family demographic data based on data images and keywords you use. Is there no information that's not safe from Facebook? That's the kind of thrust of their business versus Apple's, where they're trying to keep people from getting to your data.
To be fair, though, to say that these social media companies are using data and all of that, it a little bit of fear-mongering, right? Because if they're putting this together and maybe there's some benefit, people are getting the free access, maybe it's going to help them get better advertising. There is a value exchange that's happening, and we're acting a little bit like it's all nefarious and nobody has any idea what's going on.
No, I agree with you. There's got to be an exchange, right? You get something for free, there has to be a cost associated with that, and I think you are willing and giving up, sacrificing some privacy. But who draws the boundary at where that privacy ends, where your protections kick in? So yeah, it can get misconstrued as all fear-mongering, but at the end of the day, people are the product for these advertising-based businesses. Facebook derives 98.3% of their revenue from advertising. Apple's at 0.4%. So it's just built into that model, and we have to figure out. Tim Cook said it. It didn't work. The free market didn't work here. Regulators are going to have to step in and figure out where that balance is.
Lou, James Freeman here at the Wall Street Journal. I think we could argue whether the market was working or not, but tell us about Apple's market. Is that working? We've seen these reports. They want to share a little less information lately. Suppliers getting nervous. They're not seeing the orders they'd like to see. What kind of condition is Apple in right now?
Listen, I think Apple's trying to find a new equilibrium. Less transparency on Wall Street is never a good thing. And I think this morning there's another report out from Wall Street Journal saying that the production is getting cut on the 3 new iPhone models. So we've had multiple supplier data points stacking up to suggest that we might be at peak iPhone unit volumes. But the key is peak iPhone doesn't mean peak profit for Apple. They're really making this pivot to show that they're a services business. Their services business now is the size of Facebook's entire business. So it comes down to the last couple weeks of December, right? That's going to be make or break for Apple, and we're not going to get the data on whether they sold enough iPhones. And I really don't think that's as important as how much money they've made per customer and from those services businesses.
Well, let's move back to Facebook, I guess, because the Wall Street Journal has a piece that details the tensions between top executives in the days following that New York Times story last week. It's titled, "With Facebook at, quote, war, Zuckerberg adopts a more aggressive style. Here's part of it. Mr. Zuckerberg's new approach is causing unprecedented turmoil atop Facebook, driving several key executives from the company. At times, it has created tensions with his longtime chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg. Lou, your take on this. Again, where has this man's focus been? If you're running the company, he was busy crowing about learning Mandarin and then reading 25 books every year. And where I was talking to someone I'm very close to who works in Silicon Valley, and in reaction to that New York Times story, he said, have a cocktail, join the party, where you been? That all of these problems that have been reported at Facebook are built into their business model and have been going on in one way, shape, or form since day one.
Yeah, focus, I don't think there's been a focus there. I mean, remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal? I mean, Zuckerberg was nowhere to be found for days. I think there's been an inexcusable lack of leadership here. So, look, I'm glad. If he's really genuine about going to war, it's about time. Facebook has made continuous excuses for why they've fallen short on a lot of areas, why they haven't disclosed data breaches early. It's about time for some leaders to step up.
But the thing that makes my head hurt, James and Susan, you can both get in on this. Facebook gave app developers access to not only individuals who use these apps, but to the friends of the users of these apps for years. Yeah. That was the business model. That's how they grew to the size that they are today. Right. And then they act like it's some big accident. But I know that you'll say this. If you ever use Facebook, you know, why do you need to know my high school that I went to and my hometown and what my home address is and why you need my phone number? At every moment and every breath, they're asking for more and more and more information. And people were saying, oh, okay, let me just give it to you. And the service is for free. Well, it's not free. They're using your data and they're selling it essentially, or making money off of your back.
Yeah, so I think consumers have some responsibility here for the fact they enjoyed in many ways making this trade. But Lou, also, I think what's happening here in part, and why all this focus on Facebook, is that Washington and much of the media on the left side of the political spectrum has not forgiven them for their refusal to agree with the premise that Russian meddling was the decisive factor in the 2016 election.
Yeah, look, they've yet to issue a mea culpa for that, right? And I think you're right. I think they should, absolutely. I mean, look, the New York Times came out, they had 50 different sources, right, saying that this was known well in advance. And what did Facebook...
Yeah, but the extent that it actually mattered in 2016...
Yeah,
you can say, we knew about it. Maybe the reason they were not responding as aggressively is because they decided it's actually not that big a deal in this ocean of media that our customers are consuming.
Yeah, but listen, on Wall Street, there's clear definitions of materiality, and I would tell you that every single shareholder would argue that any interference from a foreign government on a platform that has access to 1.8 billion people would absolutely be material. So that's not something for Facebook to decide on their own in the absence of the public.
James Freeman, I'm going to walk out on the plank and say this. I don't think the media would have paid attention to everything that's been going on at a Facebook over all the years and made as big of a deal about it if there hadn't been the Russia issue that they were looking at. Right?
Exactly.
We would never know about any of this.
Appalled by Facebook's business model.
Yes, exactly. It's a little bit rich.
But I love the battle that's taking place in Silicon Valley between Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg. There's no love lost between those two. You know, in the New York Times report, Mark Zuckerberg basically said no one can use iPhones. Everyone's switching to Android after Tim Cook said that privacy is a human right and some people aren't doing it right, including Facebook.
And I'll just point out in terms of regulation, these social media companies have a liability waiver in Washington for user-created content because they aren't or weren't media companies, but now if they are, do they get that liability waiver? That's something that Congress could easily do. I'm just pointing that out. Thank you, Lou Basenese.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Come back soon, sir. Great conversation. Coming up, leaving...